Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our December 1st, Thursday's webinar. Like Delene mentioned, my name is Tiffany Rivera, and I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the New Mexico Farm and Livestock Bureau. We are a membership organization that advocates for our state's agricultural families to ensure a successful future for food production in New Mexico. Today's webinar features Dr. Lillywhite and Dr. Robinson with New Mexico State University's Department of Agriculture, Economics, and Ag Business. Their presentation is a review of state-level meat inspection and how that would benefit the state's producers. So if you are here to learn about niche marketing, you'll want to come back next month because we did reschedule that one. This is an extremely large and vast topic, and we didn't have enough time to cover both issues this evening. So we moved that presentation to January 7th. So watch your emails and our Facebook for that. So I will turn it over to our presenters for this evening. And if you guys have any questions, please type them in the chat and we'll be monitoring that. And as we mentioned before, make sure to keep your screens on mute. And Dr. Robinson and Dr. Lillywhite, thank you. The screen is yours.
Can you enable it so we can share it?
Delene, you'll have to share with them.
We've got it. So I know this is the most commonly asked question in all the last 6 months, but you can see our screen in the PowerPoint presentation, correct? Okay, well, thank you very much for having us tonight. I speak for Chatty and myself. We're excited to be here and have enjoyed this research project. We have to give credit to a number of students who participated as well, undergraduate and graduate students. Lenora Parker Cedillo did a lot of this work. And it would be great if she could be here tonight with us, and I'd make her do the presentation, but because she's not, we'll continue on. So, and I know that we're gonna have questions in the chat room or the chat box, but I'm okay if you want to ask questions along the way. You're welcome to ask questions. So
real quick though, on the side note, Lenora is gainfully employed, which is a big factor in today's world. So she's not just unable to be here, she's working, so she can't be here. All right, go ahead.
That's a good thing. So a roadmap for our discussion tonight, just we'll provide a little bit of motivation of how this project got started. We'll review the meat inspection programs that are available to us, those that are available to us right now, and then also the state meat inspection program that is not available to us, but could be. We'll provide some insights from the different interviews and surveys that we conducted along the way, provide an estimate of the costs that would be associated with this program, and then talk about some of the future work that might need to be done to continue this program or to continue the research. So my number one motivation was we were contacted by the New Mexico Department of Agriculture and asked to look at this issue. It was a request from the New Mexico State Legislature, and we were happy to do that and appreciate the working relationship we have both with the legislature and with the Department of Ag. So some ideas about some motivation about why this might be important and why people are interested in it. If you look at the total red meat production in New Mexico as a percent of 1977 levels, you can see that we've gone downhill significantly and have very little red meat, commercial red meat production today, whereas the rest of the country has gone up. Not every state, but the country as a whole has gone up. And if you've been alive in the last 3 or 4, 5, 6 months, you've seen all sorts of articles and concerns about pandemics and issues related with the supply chain. And even before that, there was interest in buying local and shopping local. So it wasn't just the pandemic, but certainly the pandemic has added some fuel to the fire for this type of work. This is just another example. This was in a meat and poultry magazine. At one time, the closures of meat processing plants throughout the country. And we were all present when that happened and saw grocery store shelves emptying and being empty. So all of those things, I think, contribute to this interest that many of us have in local food production, local meat production. So what we'd like to do is talk a little bit about the U.S. meat inspection system that we currently have. We'll talk a little bit about the interviews that we had. We conducted interviews with, there are 27 states that have state meat inspection programs. Actually 28 now, I believe, Chatty. You told me that Oregon just got a inspection program.
Yes.
So we talked to 20 states, 21 states that had state meat inspection programs. So we'll talk about some of the insights we gained from them. We interviewed New Mexico meat processors who are currently operating in the state, most of them under a custom exempt license, share some of the insights we got from them. We did a nationwide survey of consumers to find out their understanding and perceptions of meat and meat consumption, meat inspection. And then finally, we interviewed USDA administrators about the process as well. So we'd like to share some of that information, and then we'll share the budget that we were able to develop from this work.
All right, so this is where I'm going to take over for a little bit. And the next few slides are going to talk and walk us through kind of the current meat inspection program through the USDA. Of course, the federal meat inspection program became law in 1906. They started providing the inspection service in 1977. So that includes 4 different types of inspection: federal, state, retail exempt, and custom exempt. So we're going to walk through each one of those a little bit so that you understand kind of where New Mexico's processors, where they're playing, what their role is. Thank you, Dr. Lily White. So on the federal meat side, of course, these are federal employees that are assigned to a specific location. Meat and meat products can be shipped across state lines. That's probably the key factor with the federal meat inspection. You can move that meat if they're killed at a federal meat processing plant. It can move all over the United States and it can go international. These federal meat inspections require a HACCP plan, SOPs for sanitation. You have to have a recall plan, both antemortem and postmortem inspections for the actual animals. So before they're killed, and then after they've been harvested, then another inspection to confirm the carcass condition. And then of course the humane handling requirements, and then pathogen testing. This is available to all states in the United States. It's part of the USDA. This is kind of the foundation for the US animal protein platform, right? So to go into the state meat inspection program, these state meat inspection programs, which like Dr. Lily White had said, they're, as of, I guess last week, Oregon recently just started a state meat inspection. So that put it at 28 programs in the United States. They all fall under the Wholesome Meat Act of 1967, which allows state employees to actually be the inspectors. They still have to follow the USDA requirements, at least equal to the federal requirements. So that's kind of a key term. So a state meat inspection facility has to still meet all the same requirements that they have to if they're a federal meat inspection facility. All right. The only difference is a state employee versus a federal employee. Again, on the meat, because it's a state meat inspection and a state meat inspector, that meat is only allowed to stay within the state. It cannot cross state lines. So that's kind of the big split between the federal and the state, is that the state meat inspection still has all the USDA requirements, but the meat cannot cross the state lines. So the same inspection, same testing, same HACCP plans, SOP plans, the humane handling, all of that still comes into play, but it's a state employee. The USDA does cover up to 50% of the inspection costs, and that is the little footnote in here. Capital expenditures above 5,000 are I guess they're exempt. Most of that 50% would cover the cost of the hourly wages of the actual hiring of the employee. The rest of it falls, there's conditions, vehicles, equipment, testing equipment, that kind of stuff. But that's a negotiation kind of between the USDA and the state agency. There has also been, due to the COVID, there's been some discussion about the USDA increasing that inspection percentage of what they're willing to pay. And that has not gone forward, but there was some discussion of them increasing that to cover 60% to help take some of the pressure off of the animal protein providers right now. So again, the last note on this is about $50 million is spent annually to support these 27 meat programs. That number will increase now that Oregon's going to be playing, but that's 50 million is about 50% of what it really is costing these states to have these programs, right? So again, here's a map. You can add Oregon into that. I learned that last night in the meat school, the Mesaland Meat School project that we're working on. So the interesting, if you kind of look at it, you can see the fact that New Mexico, Colorado, right there's some serious players in the beef industry that are not state meat inspected. Colorado does have federal inspected facilities, so does New Mexico. But as you can, it kind of gives you some idea of the state programs that are out there. And of course, that is for poultry and beef and pork. So in addition to the federal and the state meat inspection programs, there are also 2 additional programs that support the state meat inspection. The CIS program, the Cooperative Interstate Shipment program, allows, once you are approved as a state meat inspection and you have proven that you can provide enough inspectors to ensure a safe meat supply, then the individual states can apply for the CIS. And that allows for some limited interstate shipments. Depending on the different states, that agreement's a little bit different, but as you can see, Indiana, Iowa, Maine, Missouri, North Dakota, Ohio, Vermont, and Wisconsin are all currently participating in this program. And it kind of, I want to say it kind of provides a similar level of distribution, access to markets that a federal inspection would. It does not allow you to ship out of the country, but it allows you to at least cross state lines. And the same thing with the TA cooperative agreement. I can't even try to pronounce that, so I'm not going to. But what the TA agreement allows is for state inspectors to work as a federal inspector within these federal inspected facilities. So currently in the entire United States, there's 409 establishments that are operating under the TA agreement. Those 409 are scattered all over the United States. But what that program allows is a state inspector, which is paid typically a little bit less than a federal inspector, gets to stand in place of that federal inspector, which allows for a little more flexibility. And then, of course, we'll go back to the CIS a little bit. So the Cooperative Interstate Shipment Program was established in 2008 under the Farm Bill. The key on this is the facilities must be the same as federal inspected, same as or equal.
Put on your jacket on your body.
Who's talking out there? Anyway, okay, we'll keep going. So needless to say, the inspection facility has to still meet all the same federal inspection requirements. They are allowed to use the federal mark, which allows for the interstate shipments, which were those initial marks that we showed on an earlier slide. Again, the inspectors have to be federally trained, which is a huge expense for a lot of states. Federally trained requires them to have continuing education and require some significant time in at their training facilities, so the USDA training facilities. On the CIS, they are eligible for up to 60% of inspection costs to be reimbursed. And as indicated here, 6 states currently are participating. So on the TA, this one's a little bit different, right? This is where the state employees are allowed to serve as federal inspectors standing in their place. So they are allowed to use, again, the federal stamp to allow for interstate shipments. It is used for FSIS to save money, essentially. So recognizing it's cheaper to use local inspectors than federal inspectors. So it's a way to save some money. Again, it's 100% reimbursable, but we're just talking, it's not about equipment and like the structure of the organization, it's just about the inspectors, and 17 states are participating currently. Take a breath, right? Okay, so the retail exempt. So this is kind of starts breaking down where New Mexico's, these next 2 groups, is where New Mexico's facilities currently are operating. So when a facility is retail exempt, it allows the retail establishments to sell without a HACCP plant or daily processor inspector. So you don't have to have somebody on the floor every day, and you can operate and sell retail cuts without the HACCP plan. So this retail exempt, you must use the meat or meat products that were sourced from either a state or federally inspected plant. Essentially, you're just taking the meat that a box beef or primal cuts and processing it. Again, the daily inspector does not have to be there. They do spot inspections, but they do not have to be there every day. And then a custom exempt. So this is pretty much the New Mexico discussion, which at this point, for New Mexico and for all custom exempts, they can only slaughter and process for exclusive use of the animal owner. So this is where our New Mexico processors are, right? You can bring in an animal, they're happy to slaughter it, harvest it for you, and process it, but you're not allowed to resell it. Technically, if you were to sell it as quarters or halves, that sale should have happened before it actually came in. And those individuals are the ones that specified the cut sheets or whatever. But as indicated on the slide, the meat is all stamped, not for sale. And it's because they don't necessarily have to meet all the federal or if you're in the state that has a state meat inspection, they don't have to meet those requirements. All right, but they still have to do the humane treatment of animals. There's still regulations for them. All right, Jay, take it from here.
Thanks, Jenny. So as I mentioned earlier, we did make phone interviews with 20, and it's actually 21. Nora had contacted 20 and visited with them, and I contacted an additional one she had troubles finding or getting in contact with. And we asked them questions about their history of their programs, the number and types of facilities they have, the issues that they were facing in their state inspection program, so we have a better feel for what we might face if New Mexico were to adopt a state inspection program. Number of facilities in these state inspection programs, they average 134. The high is in Texas with 228 state inspected operations, and then they have an additional 153 custom exempt. In New Mexico, because we don't have a state inspection program today, federal inspectors make periodic visits at least once a year to the custom exempt processors in our state. I should step back. I think we have 5 federally inspected meat plants in the state today. We have a number that are under the retail exempt program as well. So when we have a state meat inspection program, that burden then falls on the state inspectors. So USDA will expect as part of their reimbursement for the state inspectors to cover those custom exempt inspections when they need to happen. There are a few. Delaware was the smallest with 10 state inspected plants and 5 custom exempt. We asked about the fees, the licensing fees that these states charge, and they're very minor. So most of them very small, $25 a year, $50 a year. Arizona was the highest, at $450 a year per processor to participate in the state meat inspection program. In terms of the number of inspectors they had, that's the largest cost. People are the largest cost in any of these programs. About 82% of the total inspection costs are related to the inspectors and other employees. In Texas, the largest program we just talked about, they have 102 inspectors, and in Delaware, they have 5. So it ranges fairly significantly. The average number of inspectors, average number of plants inspected by an inspector is 2.7 plants, 6.9 when you include the custom exempt facilities. That minimum was Wyoming with 1.4, but I have to say Wyoming's got kind of an interesting inspection program. Their inspectors also inspect swimming pools, and what else did they tell me? I think they inspected daycare centers. So they had kind of a wide range of inspection responsibilities under that program. The minimum then ranged from 1.4, these are state inspected programs, 2.1 if you include the custom exempt. The maximum was 6.9 in Virginia and 19 if you include the custom exempt in Maine. So just to give you an idea, the number of personnel in these different programs ranges from a minimum of 9 in Delaware, fairly small program, as we just mentioned. Texas is the largest, 153. When we asked them about the difficulties they had, I've already mentioned the operating budget. The largest part of that was people. Finding qualified people and keeping them employed. And I don't know if that's unique to meat inspection programs. I think a lot of business people would probably tell you they have the same problem, but the inspection programs did. One of the things they told us, if you're going to start a state inspection program, make sure you allocate funding for these inspectors. You don't want to have to be training them, getting someone trained, and then they jump ship and go somewhere else. Regulatory requirements, there is a lot of red tape. You're working with the federal government. USDA is going to inspect you. They inspect once every 3 years on site. They'll come and have an on-site inspection. And then every year you have to submit paperwork, an annual report, and they pay close attention to that. And there are some states that have had some issues. New Mexico at one point had a state inspection program, and we no longer do. And there were some reasons for that. And then another difficulty they had is training. And Chatty's mentioned that training expectations are significant. If you're going to have the federal government train, that's several weeks outside of the state at a training facility where you need to pay for, not only pay the salaries, but pay for lodging and meals while they're there. I will say this, USDA, because of COVID, they're like the rest of us, they're hopping on the digital bandwagon, and some of the training that they're doing now is distance, and they expect that to continue. So that would reduce the costs for the training part. We also interviewed, as I mentioned, the New Mexico meat processors. There are 25 processors that we identified. We used the extension service. We asked extension agents to help us identify meat processors in the state. We did web searches and identified those 25 different processing facilities. We asked them questions about their state inspection, their interest in a state inspection, the type of facility that they have, whether they're slaughtering or processing, the schedules that they follow. As Chatty mentioned, if we're going to have a state meat inspection program or a federal inspection program, either one, on days that they're slaughtering, the inspector needs to be there the entire time. She talked about anti and post-mortem inspection. That just means they've got to be there the entire time the process is operating. If they're only processing on that day, then they have to be there for part of the day, but they don't have to be there for the full day. And then we asked them about their processing capacity. As I mentioned, we used different ways of identifying these individuals. These surveys were conducted in the spring before the pandemic was in full force. Maybe it was in full force and we didn't know it. At least I didn't know it quite as bad back then. We had 21 of the 25 inspectors that we were able to contact and participate with us. In that process, 6 participants indicated that they would be interested in the state meat inspection program. The remainder indicated they would not, for a variety of reasons that we can talk about. And I have an asterisk there by the 6 processors. I followed up with those 6. We had the graduate student contact them and visit with them. I followed up with the 6, and of those 6, 2 dropped out in a matter of about a month and a half, indicating that they weren't interested. One, because they didn't want to have any more inspections than they already had. By definition, you're going to have more inspections if you have a state meat inspection program, if you participate in that program. And another one who just had misunderstood. And when we talked to the owner versus a manager, the owner said, we're just not interested. We have enough business the way we are. We don't want to participate in the program. So the reasons they weren't interested in the program, the majority of them, some of them were federally inspected or wanted to be federally inspected in the sense that they needed to be able to sell across state lines. One of them was in the process of becoming federally inspected at that process. So they are now federally inspected. Most of them were satisfied with their custom exempt status. Some of them were selling or processing wild game and didn't have an interest in processing livestock. So they didn't fall into an interest category. Some of them were at capacity, didn't see themselves growing past what they were at. They were happy with where they were at. And then there were a number of them who said, I don't want to do additional inspections. I don't want people coming into my business any more than I have to. And then there are some that were concerned about their ability to afford the upgrades that would be necessary to meet the inspection standards that come with the state inspection program.
All right, back to me. So in addition to the processor interviews and the director of the other state meat inspection programs, we also conducted a consumer survey. This was done through a survey panel company in March of 2020. Keep in mind, this was pre-COVID. So this is before all this food scarcity and uncertainty and the hoarding and all of the chaos that we've seen as far as our supply chain, stability of our supply chain. So the responses of this, we were able to get, we got 2,000 consumers that participated in the survey. There's some interesting details on the survey. The initial idea for the survey actually was to kind of explore consumers' interest for alternative proteins. And then COVID hit, and all of a sudden that was irrelevant to the story. It was more about trying to tie this consumers' responses into this and how to move it forward as far as the direction for any kind of state meat inspection program. So some of our findings were that consumers truly had no idea about a meat inspection program. They assume that they're inspected and they are unaware of the details that are included in that inspection. Of course, consumers trust current inspection programs. They have no reason not to trust them. So they assume that the meat that's on the shelves in the grocery stores is safe and safe for their families, and the federal government or whoever, somebody is watching out and making sure that it is safe and they trust it. There was a little note, sorry, Jake, just for a second, the willingness to pay for an inspection. There was some different responses on that, which kind of directs the next couple of questions, the little graphs. Okay, thanks, Jay. So on the survey, of course, we asked their familiarity with meat inspection requirements. As you can see, out of 1,981 responses, 41% of them had not familiar at all. And when you add slightly familiar and not familiar at all, it's a pretty significant amount. And that provides evidence that they really don't have any idea what's happening with the meat other than they just think it's safe, right? This next graph also provides the same evidence. So trust in inspection programs. They somewhat agree or strongly agree, when you add those two up, it's highly evident that our consumers in the United States trust the meat, which is it's a great message. On the marketing side, that's a great message. It's just a matter of how do you move a program like this, what we're talking about, when they don't even realize that there's a whole lot of difference between the different programs in place, the options. They just trust in general. And then, of course, does your state, this was kind of a check just to see how familiar they were. Keep in mind, this was a national survey. We had participants, I believe, from every state completed the survey. And so we were able to see if there was a correlation between their zip code and being able to confirm if they had a state meat inspection program or if they did not, and how they answered this question. And so only 27% of them answered correctly to that, does your state have a state meat inspection program? 38% were wrong, and then 34% had no idea if there was a state meat inspection program for their state, which again provides a clear evidence that consumers do not have any clue about the meat inspection that's occurring and who's responsible. They just don't know.
So we're almost there. I know we're running a little bit short of time, but based on the work that we did, we drafted what a small state meat inspection program would look like in terms of the people that we would need. So we'd have a director, we'd have compliance officers to make sure the inspections are occurring as they needed to. Those compliance officers would work with the retail exempt inspections. They would need to go out and make periodic inspections of, for example, butchers who are using primal cuts from another meat processing facility. They would need to check on them. We also had 5 field inspectors. Those are the individuals who would actually be in the meat processing businesses on a daily basis. A lead inspector who would kind of play a rover position. If the inspector couldn't make it, they would fill in for that inspector on that day, and they would do the coordination. We're assuming that they're going to do some double duty here. So we don't have a training officer. Some larger programs would have a training officer. You know, the bigger programs, when you have 150 some odd employees, they have a lot more specificity in their job responsibilities. So we're assuming that someone's going to have to wear multiple hats in a small program like this. And let me say, this is based on assuming 6 companies would be a part of the processing. And that was just based on our interviews with those processors. There could be more. I know there's more out there who are interested in meat processing and starting meat processing companies. We just don't have a way of knowing how many there are. So we went with the 6 that we had, knowing that even those 6, it may be more like 4, but we know there's some additional ones out there that could join. And as they did, we would have to increase the size of this operation. We cannot have a meat processing, a meat inspection service that has 5 inspectors if we have 30 or 40 companies operating in the system. So that's a caveat that we need to make sure that we understand. This is kind of the base. If it grows from here, you got to make sure the structure grows with it. Based on our analysis, and we did a pretty thorough job. We looked at what state pays employees. We looked at transportation costs, supplies. There's a large testing component to this. So there has to be meat samples taken on every day that they're slaughtered. There has to be meat samples taken. We assume that they would be sent to a lab in South Dakota who does third-party testing for other state meat inspection programs. So all those together, it's about a 1.1 million on a continuing basis. The first year would be more. If you buy cars for the inspectors, trucks for the inspectors, computers, it's going to be roughly 1.4, 1.5 million in the first year. And then on a continuing basis, about 1.1, 1.2 million every year. That's the full amount. So USDA would cover up to 50%. It's a reimbursable expense. So the state would have to pay that up front at the end of the year. If they met the responsibilities and the requirements of the federal government would reimburse them 50%. The state inspection programs we talked to, that wasn't an issue. Most of them got, not most of them, all of them got reimbursed. That as long as you're doing your job, you're going to get reimbursed. with the exception, as Chatty mentioned, capital expenditures above $5,000. So USDA is not going to pay for trucks or lab equipment.
And keep in mind the literature on the USDA, it's up to 50%. And so right now they've been paying 50 and the discussion for the 60% to increase it to 60. But if it got a little hairy, it could be cut.
Yeah, could go the other way too.
Could be cut. Yeah, it could go the other way.
So we had 3 states who provided us budget information. Fairly large, 2 of them fairly large, 63 processors in their inspection program. The third one's 29 processors. 82% salary were in our budget that we propose. That's pretty close to that. Travel and travel will depend on the size of the state and how far away the processors are from each other. Supplies, equipment, other costs. Our other costs include the lab testing responsibilities. I did show this to USDA budget analysts, and they felt like that was a reasonable number given the size that we're talking about. I did visit with one of the state inspectors from a state that I think is fairly similar to us in size, number of processors that would be participating potentially. And that individual felt like it was a ballpark number. Didn't have any heartburn over the numbers we presented. So, you know, I've heard personally, and I know many of you are maybe fall in these categories, and I know Chatty's heard of them too. There's a lot of interest in the state meat inspection program and developing a local meat inspection industry. The reasons for that support are many, and I've only listed a few here, but to support local producers, local livestock producers, reduce carbon emissions, decrease industry concentration. The meat industry is very concentrated. Increase industry resiliency, support the local economy. If you add COVID today, there's a big push to have kind of a regional or a local food production just because of the scares that we've gone through. This is a caveat, and I don't mean to rain on anybody's parade, but at the same time, I think it's good to go in eyes wide open. And so if you look at a state meat inspection program, the profitability of it, it's going to be hard to compete head to head with a national market. So when we talk to the processors that we talked to that were interested, I think the large ones were probably 25, 30 animals a week that they were processing. And they thought that they, in a state meat inspection program, could grow that about double. Compare that to, I'm familiar with a small processing operation in northern Utah. They process 4,000 head a day, at least when I was up there they did. And that was considered very small. They were on the very small end of that national market. So if you start to look at that, this is my attempt, and it's just ballpark numbers to look at what your cost comparisons would be. So if we have a 1,250 pound steer, and that's probably a little heavy for New Mexico. And at the time I looked at this, prices were about $1.10. I know they've changed a lot and will likely change some more. That animal would cost $1,375. I went to a local processor and said, what would it take to process this under a federal system so I could sell it to retail? And the total cost, cut and wrapped, would be about $1,100. So if you're going to do this, if you're going to go buy the steer, have it processed, you're into it $2,500 per animal, or about $500 or $5 a pound, assuming a yield of 484, which again, these aren't exact numbers, but that's probably pretty close. If you go look at the cutout value on the wholesale level, this came from a cutout calculator that Colorado State had up on their website at one point. It's been taken down since then. About $1,600 is the wholesale value of that steer, about $3.30 pounds. So the grocery stores in town are buying that meat, and these are in primal cuts. So there's a little bit of, again, this is a ballpark number, for about $3.30 a pound versus the $5.19 that we would be into it to have it processed locally. That same meat, so I took that cutout value and the cuts that Colorado State said would come from that animal. I compared them to big box store, looked at their online prices for the different cuts of meat. That animal was about $2,700 in retail cuts. And this was 3 or 4 months ago, 5, 6 months ago. So about $5.64 a pound. So if you look at it, you're into it $5.19 a pound in local, and on the retail level it's selling for $5.64. So if you can retail it for that differential, you can make some money. But you're gonna have to do the marketing, and the reason why Chatty's gonna be doing a presentation next week on niche marketing and specialty marketing is just that reason. This month, is it this month?
Next month.
Next month. We got to get through the end of the semester first, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I don't, again, is it possible? Yes. And there are people who are doing well with local, but it's a challenge. And just everyone needs to know you can't walk into it head to head with those national processors. So further work, we need to look at maybe the feasibility of establishing, building, and operating a small meat processor. There's some data out there, but it's a little bit dated, about 10 years old, that USDA commissioned that looks at the feasibility of starting a meat processing business. We can look at the economic and fiscal impacts on the state. We've started that. So I saw in the chat, someone said, well, why would you want to do a local or a state's meat inspection program? The argument you could make is if you can keep that processing money in the state instead of sending it to Texas or to Utah or wherever that money is leaving, instead of sending our animals outside of state and having the processing done outside, that money will be recirculated in the state's economy. And that's what we're looking at right now. And we'll try to come up with some estimates of what the benefit is to the state's economy by keeping it inside the state. Looking at consumer demand for local. So the analysis I just showed you was assumed that it was equal prices, and individuals may be willing to pay more for New Mexico grown beef or New Mexico grown lamb or pork. So that's another area that could be worked on, is what is the willingness to pay? And there's some evidence that there is some willingness to pay for local. How widespread that is, I don't know. We're a fairly poor state when you look at our average household income. And so, you know, you're not going to get a huge premium in New Mexico across the entire state. Your pockets, I think you can find, and Chatty can talk about that in her next presentation. Some issues I think you have to ask yourself too. Federal meat inspection is available to us today. There are several processors who are moving that way or who are federally inspected, but why not more? As Chatty mentioned earlier, it doesn't have to be exactly like the federal inspection program. So you don't have to use the exact same processes they're using, but it has to be equal to. So you're not going to get away with not having process or not having inspections. You're going to have to be inspected still. So if the concern is I don't want to be inspected, you can have a state inspection program and you're not going to get participation because they're still going to have to be inspected. And another issue I think is interesting. There's strong demand for local now. Meat prices have gone up. Food prices in general, I think, have gone up over the last 5, 6, 7 months. People are panicked. It's interesting, even in the recent lockdown that we had, all of a sudden toilet paper is in high demand again. It just, our mentality is a little unique in these circumstances. So, you know, there's a demand for local right now, demand for, especially for local food. But the question is, what will it look like a year from now or 2 years from now, assuming we ever get back to normal? And I sometimes question if we ever will. Feels like we may never, but someday we will. And will consumers still be willing to pay extra back when they can buy a hamburger for $3 a pound from a national processor? Are they going to pay $4 for local or $5? That's a question that I don't know that any of us have the answer, but it has to be in the back of our mind a little bit.
So to add a little bit to that, when we were doing the interviews with the other state inspected directors, we kind of had that conversation of, well, what's the incentive to have a state meat inspection program? And consistently throughout those interviews, we continually heard that using a local inspector, somebody that knows the community, somebody that's available, more easily available than a federal inspector, made it so much easier to operate. And so on the positive side of a state meat inspection is that you're able to employ local people that know the community and understand, okay, so we're not killing today on Friday, we're gonna end up, something happen and we're gonna kill tomorrow on Saturday. Well, for a federal facility, that could be an issue, but for a state, as long as he's available, then it'll just happen, right? He's available. And so that seems to be the biggest incentive for the other states, is that being able to hire local people that know those communities has a serious value within those operations.
So the other thing I would mention too, in the interviews we had with the state directors, and they weren't all the directors, sometimes they were assistant directors, but with those other state inspection programs, we asked them, I think Nora asked about the profitability, and profitability probably isn't the right word because these are state-run programs and not necessarily meant to make profit as we normally think of them. But she asked about, what's the value for these programs? And most of them indicated that, yeah, they're expensive, they're losing money from a state standpoint, but that they add value to the community. That they felt, these directors felt like it was adding value. There was more businesses being involved. Just what we mentioned a minute ago, those businesses are staying, instead of sending that meat outside and then having it come back in, sending it outside in the form of live animals and coming back in meat products, that processing is happening inside the state and generating economic activity inside the state. So that was one of their incentives that they saw. So I'm looking at, I want to make sure I answer all the questions, or Chatty and I answer all the questions. Does the state program have to be under USDA guidelines? And the answer is, it doesn't have to be exactly, but it has to be equal to. So the training sometimes can be a little bit different, but at the end of the day, you still have to have all the paperwork that you would have for a federal inspection program. You have to be inspected. That stays the same. The primary difference is who's inspecting you, a state employee versus a federal employee. And Katie mentioned that it reduces the risks of issues inherent in massive plants. That's exactly true. So if you look at these large plants, when they got shut down, that first graphic we showed you with all the meat plant shutdowns, they're built for efficiency. So they have people standing side by side. I was talking to someone today, and I think they said it's 8 minutes from the time that animal walks in the door to when the carcass is hanging in the cooler. That's how efficient that line is. But that comes at a cost too. So if you get a pandemic and you have COVID-19 and you're standing side by side, it's pretty hard not to share that with your neighbor. And so when you have these big plants, hundreds of people sitting side by side, you shut down, that's a big issue. And where you have smaller plants, you still have, they're still gonna have health issues, but it's easier maybe to control and limit it. So one plant gets it doesn't necessarily mean 10 plants across the state get it. So that was, I think, a great point to bring up. Need to build trust, has to be a stringent inspection. As I indicated, New Mexico had a program before and we lost it. It wasn't voluntary.
USDA pulled it, guys.
Yeah, USDA took it away from us. And part of it was because the lack of inspection and lack of paperwork. And it's absolutely right.
Mm-hmm. And it goes back to the discussion of having adequate inspectors available. So if you're harvesting that day, you're planning, you have them all lined up and your inspector doesn't show up. When we lost it, it's because we continued to process instead of stopping and having to wait for our inspector to get there. And so those kind of events happened, and the USDA, it doesn't fall within the federal meat inspection program and the requirements of the Federal Meat Act. So the state lost it because we didn't allocate enough resources to hire enough inspectors. We're trying to read through all the questions.
Yes, I'm sorry, I'm not ignoring you. I'm just reading the chat, making sure I haven't. And if you want to open your mics and ask, you're welcome to do that too.
Do. It's much easier if you'll talk to us. Hi, Mr. Ogden.
Oh, maybe I didn't get.
How are you?
I'm
I have
fabulous.
a
How are
quick
you?
question. Good. Quick question on one of your slides on your presentation. You had that the 1,250 pound animal would be 484 pounds of meat. I was thinking that they dressed out at around 62%. Is that 62% include like tongue and stuff or what? I was just curious on how you got your pounds there.
Yeah, and there may be some better experts at this, but this is what I've, based on the cutout value, that's what it comes up with. You've got bone. I didn't include bone, and I could show you the spreadsheet, I guess, where it has all the different components. But this is retail cuts of meat that would be sold in the grocery store shelf.
Okay.
And that number may be a little bit low. I was looking at some other estimates, but I think it's ballpark close.
Hey, Jay, this is Anthony. I mean, it depends on how you have that processed. If you take and have boneless cuts or grind it into hamburger, the loss into fat and the loss into bone makes up a difference. You can lose up to 35% off a hanging weight, depending on the process that you have done.
And the fat, the fat coverage on the animal as well.
So the University of Tennessee, this Caleb West, has a really good extension here, and I'm putting the link in the chat on the breakdown, so you can get another one too. Another question I have here is, what advantage does a federally inspected plant have to go state inspected?
Well, two things. You can be both state and federally inspected if you wanted to. The only thing I could think of potentially, when I talked to the USDA and I said, I kind of asked that same question about, is there concern with federal inspection? And in some cases, they don't have enough inspectors. And so you saw that TA program where they'll actually hire state employees to do federal inspections for them. So in some cases, they don't have enough manpower, person power, to meet the inspection. And that could cause a problem. And so in some cases, they won't offer federal inspection. They won't let you become federally inspected because they don't have the capacity to take you on right now. When I asked him about that with New Mexico, he said that was not a problem. That if a plant wanted to be federally inspected in New Mexico today, USDA is ready to take them on. And they have the inspectors available to do that. So again, I think Chatty brought up, a state inspector may be your neighbor. That being said, they better be doing their job or we're going to be in trouble. But, maybe they are willing to work some odd hours. You still have to pay them. Their USDA is very strict about the pay, overtime pay. There's a little bit of a scheduling issue with all this as well. We didn't talk about that, but you're going to have to coordinate plants. So if someone's killing on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, you're going to have an inspector in that plant on those days. And so you might want to get another plant that's going to kill on Tuesdays and Thursdays to offset each other. And that's all coordination that would have to take place inside the system. Someone had asked again, can New Mexico have its own standards? The answer is no. We can't. You have to meet federal standards, again, equal to, not same as, but equal to, in order to be able to be a state inspected program. So the advantage of a federally inspected plant relative to state, you can sell across state lines by definition. If you do the CIS program that Chatty talked about, that's kind of an add-on to the state inspection program. It's additional application you have to make. Then we could sell across state lines. But there's not a lot of, 28 states doing that right now. And I think, Chatty, there were 6 participating in that program. Any other questions? Anything we missed, concerns?
This is Gail Armstrong. I raised my hand, but nobody called on me, so I put it down. I
Sorry.
wasn't sure what to do. I was curious. I know, for New Mexico, it would create jobs and it would be possibly, sorry, I look like heck, but anyway, it would create jobs and I believe this is kind of an urban versus rural. A lot of people don't really understand the cattle ranching business and the process that all goes through. But I was wondering if there's any interest at all of making it like a public-private partnership type thing where we would maybe have a license that you could go out and get an education on how to do these meat inspections. And then the private sector runs this instead of the state government.
That would be unique. It's not happening anywhere else. I'm not saying it couldn't happen. I don't know that I asked that question, but most of the programs are being run out of state departments of agriculture or similar organizations. So that would be a question we'd have to take to FSIS and ask them if that would be a possibility.
Okay,
Certainly
thank you so much.
The training part of it would be fine. We could certainly offer training, and I think that's another issue as I talk to processors, identifying and finding individuals to work in processing plants for the small ones in New Mexico is a challenge.
The labor force is a challenge.
Yeah, finding people who have that skill is a challenge. Someone had asked, let's see, can you get a list of all USDA plants here in New Mexico? You can. So if you go to USDA FSIS, there's a database on there where it will list all the state inspection, lists all the states. You can see their annual reports. If they've had any issues, that they have to report that. You can see the individual companies that are federally inspected. And in Mexico, I think, I can't remember the exact number off the top of my head. We have
It's like 32.
32?
32 total.
That includes those retail exempt that are inspected by federal, a butcher who buys primal cuts from a federally inspected plant and then cuts them into retail cuts. That individual is considered federally inspected in that database. And then I think we have 5 that are slaughter processing, what I normally think of as a meat processor.
The majority of those 32 were like jerky companies or value added. They're taking the raw meat and seasoning it and pre-cooking it for other restaurants, those kind of services. So they weren't necessarily harvesting or cutting whole carcasses.
Dr. Lillywhite and Dr. Robinson, I want to thank you both for the time that you've given us tonight. I think that the presentation was very helpful and very insightful, and I thank you for taking time to answer the questions. There's a lot of potential here, a lot of interest in a state meat inspection program, and I encourage you all to continue investigating that. I ask that you guys remember to join us for our January 7th, first Thursday, where we look into the niche marketing. And if you would like a recap of this, we are going to post it to our YouTube channel as well. So thank you all for joining us this evening, and I hope that you found this presentation informational and insightful. Thanks.